This webinar for technical assistance providers for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be mainly focused on technical assistance providers. There will be follow-up webinars for the public and businesses that will be announced later. I am Steve Curley. I work with the Oregon Small Business Development Center Network, and I'll be running the slides, and I'm going to introduce Mark Gregory, who is our state director, and allow him to take it from here. So Mark.
Well, good morning, everyone. Mark Gregory, state director with the Oregon Small Business Development Center Network. As a former restaurateur myself, I recognize the fabric that restaurants provide, to the social and cultural aspects of our communities. And we started early in the pandemic with Mike Linoff, our former state director, will introduce in a little bit, developing the Oregon Restaurant COVID Assistance Program, or ORCA project, housed at BizCenter at our OregonSBDC.org website. But it's really about ensuring that the support that restaurants have given our communities continues through SBA and our state partners in such ways that we can preserve the fabric that those restaurants have created in the local community. So with that, we'll also introduce some of our partners that made this all possible. I don't know, Steve, you want me to take that, or? Okay, away we go. So first, starting with SBA, Marty Golden, the regional district, well, you're now regional director of the SBA. Marty, you want to introduce you and staff?
Sure. Do you want me to introduce everybody first, or just kind of kick off my comments, or?
You might want to just maybe introduce Sam and yourself, and then we'll get the rest of the partners and go to comments.
Okay. So my name is Marty Golden. I'm the acting regional administrator for the Pacific Northwest region of the U.S. Small Business Administration. I'm normally also the district director. I've got two hats right now of Oregon, Portland District Office, which encompasses Oregon and part of Washington. And we've got here doing the main part of the presentation, Samuel Goldstein, who's the deputy district director of the Portland District Office.
And then in addition, we'll introduce some of our state partners. Chris Cummings, maybe starting with you and Brian.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name's Chris Cummings. I'm the Assistant Director for Economic Development at Business Oregon. And Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Brian Plinsky. I work at Business Oregon. I'm an entrepreneurship strategist and work with manage the technical assistance for underrepresented providers program.
And with that, I'll take the honor of introducing my former boss and state director, Michael Linoff, who's running this project for us on the restaurant assistance.
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. As Mark mentioned, I've come out of retirement to serve as project manager for the Oregon Restaurant COVID Assistance Program. Basically, we have a team of restaurant industry experts throughout the state who provide technical assistance to restaurateurs in support of the general services provided by the 19 SBDCs statewide. Some of our advisors are on the call today, I see Greg and Jose on the call. I think there may be a couple others. So again, just happy to be here, happy to be part of it. And we stand ready to support the network in our efforts to get as many of the restaurant revitalization funds here in Oregon to Oregon restaurateurs. Thanks again, everybody.
Mike's assembled a great team. Again, you can find us at SBDC, OregonSBDC.org. And also wouldn't want to miss our capital access team leader, Noah Brockman. Noah, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Noah Brockman, capital access team lead. For the past 11 years, we've been this statewide specialized program within our SBDC network with regional capital access team advisors around the state, helping folks access the most appropriate forms of capital for their situations. And nice to see our team members attending as well. Glad to be here. Mike and I will be helping out with the chat. So as our partners have questions going through the presentation, we'll do our best to facilitate those as we go.
And as Noah mentioned, the most appropriate resources, I'd also just make a side mention that the commercial rent relief program is still open to landlords and tenants, and Business Oregon can provide additional information on it, but a great opportunity and another source of capital. And with that, Marty, I'll turn it back over to you for additional comments.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I want to say thank you to everybody for being here today. By being here, you're demonstrating your commitment to the region's restaurants and small businesses. And we know these are often the smallest of the small businesses, yet they have such a big impact on our local economy. The accommodation and food services industry is the top industry for small business employment in Oregon. In fact, 72% of Oregon food service jobs are from small businesses. These businesses provide the setting for so much of our social lives, where we meet our friends and families. So helping inns, bars, and restaurants recover means helping all of us move forward past this pandemic time. As one of the hardest hit industries during the pandemic, we need help for restaurants and those businesses in that sector. This Restaurant Revitalization Fund is a needed lifeline to help those businesses get back on their feet. Through the $28.6 billion in appropriated funding, restaurants, food trucks, caterers, bars, brew pubs, tasting rooms, and other eligible entities will be able to apply for up to $10 million in funding. And if they use those for eligible expenses, recipients will not be required to repay the grants. As we've learned from other COVID-19 relief programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, success for small businesses is dependent on organizations and individuals like you all on the phone here today to help entrepreneurs in their greatest hour of need. So during this webinar today, experts from the SBA team and the Oregon Small Business Development Center are going to teach you details about the RRF program in hopes that we can collectively provide the technical assistance restaurants need to successfully obtain funding. The SBA is dedicated to ensuring access to RRF funding is equitable and accessible. And with your collaboration, we can help the hardest hit small businesses recover and move their businesses forward. So I want to thank you again for being here and for your dedication to the small business community. Go ahead.
And with that, I think we'll turn it over to Sam to take us through the presentation. I'll bring that up here in just a sec. Are you there, Sam?
Right, have to unmute. All right, thanks. I wanted to express appreciation as well to the technical assistance providers, the SBDC network, folks who are on this line today who really help us to get to the intended recipients of these grants to help small businesses access COVID-related funding and in general, just helping small businesses. So I want to just get right into the presentation so we can advance the slide and talk about the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. So this came into effect with the American Rescue Plan Act. It's recent, March 11. March 11 is going to be a date that we come back to later on in the presentation, actually even here. So we're rolling this out rapidly because we know that restaurants are hard hit. We did, as Marty mentioned a little bit ago, we have $28.6 billion. We expect to expend the funds relatively quickly. And so it's important for us to make sure that people have access to the funds. The funds, once dispersed, have to be utilized by March 11, 2023. So we'll talk about the equivalent recovery period on this in just a few minutes. Go ahead and advance. Who's eligible for the program? So we have a long list here of potential eligible businesses. Essentially, we're looking for places where people sit and dine, people who eat at establishments. And so the list here includes restaurants and food trucks and caterers and bars and snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars. I've had a couple questions about that, juice bars, coffee shops, some bakeries, brew pubs, and so on. On this list, you'll see an asterisk. What's important to know here is that business types with the asterisk require on-site sales to be at least 33% of gross receipts. So the first example of this is the brew pub, tasting room, tap room. If folks don't provide food, I was in a brew pub this weekend in my local area. They don't provide food. And so they wouldn't qualify, but folks who do and meet this requirement would. So same applies for breweries, microbreweries, inns, and distilleries and wineries. We can move on to the next slide. How much am I eligible for? The maximum amount for an individual outlet is $5 million. This program, we're going to talk about the maximum size, the maximum amount of a loan cannot be more, a grant cannot be more than 10 million regardless of how many outlets you have. So 5 million maximum for a single and 10 million maximum for eligible entities with multiple outlets. The minimum award for this is $1,000. SBA considers an amount less than $1,000 to be de minimis and therefore not eligible for the program. Something different about this program than some of the others that we've had, other grant programs. Businesses do not have to register in the Systems for Award Management, otherwise known as SAM. Does not have to have a cage number or a DUNS number. And this is good to know because if you've gone through that process, getting an identifier number can take a week or longer, a week or two. And so we've done away with that for this particular grant program. Valid unexpired ITINs are acceptable. So an ITIN is a tax identification number that's provided to permanent residents, green card holders, and those individuals can apply for this program. And there's a little information here on this slide. The slide can be made available to you. You can click to IRS and get a little bit more information on what it takes to get a renewed ITIN if your ITIN is expired, and a little bit of information about why and how ITINs are issued and why they expire and need to be renewed. In short, if you've received an ITIN, and I'm just very briefly here, if you have an ITIN and you don't file a tax return within 3 years, they generally go they expire, and they also have a limitation, a number of years. So the fact that you have an ITIN doesn't mean that it's current. So I would encourage you as the TA provider to ensure that the applicant has a valid unexpired ITIN. So who's not eligible? So some of our programs have been opened up to nonprofits and others that typically aren't eligible for our 7A program or 504 program. For this particular program, state or local government entities are not eligible. If you have an entity that has affiliation with more than 20 locations, then it also is not eligible. Affiliation, however, is not our typical definition. Affiliation for this particular program means that the applicant entity owns 51% or more of another entity, or in this case, more than 20 entities to be ineligible. So you may have an applicant entity that has 20 outlets, and that would be okay. If that same applicant entity has 21 outlets, it's not eligible. If that same entity is affiliated with 20 or more than 20 outlets, then it also is not eligible. So there's a little bit of work to do in that particular case, but most folks we're going to be dealing with are not going to have more than 20 outlets or affiliations. But just be aware the difference on affiliation here is it's the applicant entity only that we're concerned about. and that applicant entity would have to have 51% or more ownership in any other entity to be affiliated. A lot of words. I'm hoping that came through. We can talk about it more if you have questions about it when we're done with the slide presentation. Also ineligible are entities that have pending applications for shuttered venue operator grant. Publicly traded companies, if the business is permanently closed, then we're not going to be providing grant funds. Nonprofits are not eligible in this particular case, and again, less than $1,000 is de minimis. All right, form of organization. Well, the traditional forms of organization are going to be eligible for the program. So what you would normally see: C Corp, S Partnership, LLC, sole props, self-employed also, independent contractors also Schedule C, tribal businesses, and so on. So that's pretty much a fairly open door there. All right, on franchises. So if you're working with a franchise firm, you'll want to check to see it's eligible for the program, but must be on SBA's franchise registry. It's easy to find SBA's franchise directory. You go to sba.gov and you type in franchise directory and you'll get there. I took a look at that the other day, and there are almost 6,000 different franchises listed. It has to be eligible in our program. If it isn't an approved franchise, there is a process that the applicant could go through, or the franchisor could go through. But I think just knowing that if it's a franchise, you need to go out to the franchise directory as a starting point and ensure that the applicant's franchise is listed and meets criteria. So we've kind of gotten pretty loose on the bankruptcy definition for PPP, and this extends to the restaurant revitalization program as well. So we will not allow an entity that's in an active bankruptcy to participate in the program, and we define that as being one that is not yet in a confirmed plan for bankruptcies with plans. So Chapter 11, 12, and 13. 11 for business, 12 for farm, and 13 usually for the smaller business. So if it's in a confirmed plan, then we're good to go. And if they've recently filed and they're not yet, then they're not eligible. Also Chapter 7, because it's a liquidation, it's a closure of the business, isn't eligible. And of course, permanently closed businesses. So that's the story with bankruptcies, a fairly liberal approach. How do other SBA relief programs impact RRF? So we're going to net out PPP loans that were made to the applicant entity. So we'll get into the details of the maximum amount eligible, but in short, we're going to net out PPP, so you're not going to be able to get both of those in the gross. We want to point out that the applicant entity for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund should use the same tax identification number, EIN, social security number, as it did in the PPP application. That is what should occur. So make sure that folks are not trying to break apart an entity if it's a holding company, if it's individual loans with for PPP, they should be applying the same way. So I'm just going to read this bullet here. If an applicant applied for a first draw PPP loan for multiple locations under one EIN, subsequently applied for a second draw under different EINs, the applicant must provide the EINs for each entity that received second draw PPP loans. So we found that there were some problems with the second draw for first draw recipients where this occurred, and so we want to be consistent, and we'll be able to net out the PPP from the applicant's maximum grant amount. If there is an existing PPP application in for an RRF applicant, we ask that they immediately withdraw their PPP application. The net effect should be no different ultimately, because we would have netted out the PPP. So PPP will be open for perhaps another month So that will be something that can come up with your new RRF applicants. So in short, let's not have any pending applications for the other, for PPP or SVOG, or along with the RRF. Okay, so also applicants similar to PPP in some instances have to certify that that this grant is necessary to support ongoing and anticipated operations. So what we're getting at here is that folks that don't need it shouldn't apply, and that's an attestation by the applicant that they need it. Pretty straightforward. Eligible uses of funds. So what can you use the money for? So we have a kind of expanded eligible use of funds. So we've broken them out into some columns here. This presentation was nice. Business expenses, so all the ordinary expenses, payroll, utilities, maintenance, supplies, food and beverage, expenses, including raw materials, so the cost of goods sold, covered supplier costs, and a pretty broad range of the working capital needs of a business. Plus, if an entity has improved their facility for outside seating, some of the modifications that they may have made or had to make as a result of some of the restrictions that were in place, those are also eligible expenses. Just broad expansion, however, is not. So if you added outdoor seating or a deck and heating because you needed to do so to maintain operations, that's fine. But if you build a new restaurant space indoor, we just remodeled our interior or something to that effect, that's not going to be eligible. Now, maybe they got a new air handling system or something that probably would be eligible. So just a little distinction there on construction related expenses. And the other thing that's kind of cool about this is that full payments of principal and interest are eligible as expenses for this program. And you'll see the little bullet here, it does not include prepayment. So you can't just pay off your loan, but your regular installments are eligible. So we'll move on. When do I have to use the funds? Remember I was saying March 11 is an important date. Well, if you receive these grant funds, you have to utilize them no later than March 11, 2023. So we give 2 years from the date of enactment of the legislation. Presumably it'll be a pretty good chunk of time from the time that the funds are dispersed to the business until the period has elapsed. It should be adequate based on the calculations of qualifying. If the business permanently closes after getting the funds, the covered period ends immediately. And any funds not spent should be returned, which makes sense, right? So if the businesses just can't make it, they need to return the funds they haven't utilized. So when do I have to use the funds? Use of funds assessment. After all the funds have been exhausted, then we will receive a detailed expenditure report and certification for the required period. So we expect that you're tracking the expenditures, and you'd be able to provide that report demonstrating use of the funds per eligibility requirements. Until applicant completes the use of funds assessment, applicants are required to provide self-reported unaudited data detailing use of distributed funds through 2023. So again, just maintain your records and be able to self-report. And we'll provide more details on that in the upcoming weeks on how to do that. So we'll slide forward.
Hey, Sam, quick question on the use of funds.
Sure.
So e-commerce related expenses to conduct and continue online business operations, would that qualify under the use of funds?
I'm going to presume that was necessary in order to operate. So, getting electronic menu, ordering system, something of that nature to be no touch, something like that, I would say yes. If they developed you know, I don't know, depending on the circumstances, but I'd say in general, the answer is probably yes. But then you'd want to know enough about it to make sure that it wasn't like a permanent expansion type of approach. But general business expenses are going to be eligible. I may or may not have answered it perfectly, but I've seen a lot of, you know, I've gone out to a lot of restaurants, and a lot of folks are putting the QR code on the table. You know, they manage it without, you know, too much server activity being involved, and that is certainly going to be a modification that was made related to COVID. So that's pretty clear. So moving on to how you calculate the potential amount of grant from the RRF. There are three different calculations, and the first one is going to be the one that most businesses are probably going to use if they were in business prior to January 1, 2019. Then they'll use what we're calling calculation 1. And calculation 1 is going to be the full year gross receipts from 2019 less the gross receipts from 2020, presumably significantly smaller. So there'll be a delta there. That's the reduction in gross receipts year over year, less the PPP loan amount, or loan amounts if you got two. So that's pretty straightforward and pretty generous. So I think that one is fairly self-explanatory. Let's move on to 2. Calculation 2 is if you began operations during 2019. So you had partial operations during 2019. In this case, we're going to look at the number of months that the business was open. So let's say the business opened in June. You had 6 months of sales in 2019. You're going to take the average monthly gross receipts and multiply it by 12. So you'll have an annualized gross receipts amount, and then we'll treat it. You know, we'll then subtract the gross receipts from 2020, and we'll take out the PPP. So very similar to 1, except we're annualizing based on average monthly gross receipts during 2019. That's going to cover most everybody else except calculation number 3. Calculation number 3 is for folks that began operations in 2020 or maybe haven't even opened yet. So this is going to be everybody else, right? So because this program is anticipating providing assistance to folks who didn't have a great deal of gross receipts but yet had expenses because of the late start. I mean, there are a lot of folks who just had bad timing, basically. So if they were in operations on or after January 1, 2020 and March 10, 2021, and even if they haven't opened, then we're going to allow eligible expenses through March 11, 2021. So we're going to look at the total amount of eligible expenses between February 15, 2020, as early as that, and March 11, 2021, less the gross receipts, less the PPP. So I think those are not particularly complicated process to determine the 3 types of calculations for the potential applicant, and quite generous. Now there's a little asterisk there. Applicants that began operations partially in 2019 can choose which method they want to use. So it may be the calculation 3 is more advantageous than 2. They can choose the one they want to use, or the one that's most advantageous to them. So they may need to run a couple of calcs to figure out what makes sense for them. So moving on. What can I exclude from gross receipts? Right, so if you got a PPP loan, you exclude that. Any SBA debt relief payments that were received, you can exclude that. EIDL loan, target advances, you can exclude that if you would ordinarily include it in your gross receipts. Also state and local business grants and Randolph-Shepard Act financial relief and restoration payments. I actually don't know what that is, but hopefully you do, or the business owner that received it will. So we're not including any of those items as part of gross receipts, even if they might ordinarily get that kind of treatment. So how does a business apply? They go directly to our platform at restaurants.sba.gov. You can also type in www.sba.gov/restaurants, and you'll get to our webpage, and there'll be a couple buttons to click, but that's a direct link to the application. I would encourage folks to look at the Restaurant Revitalization Fund webpage. It has a lot of good information. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. So we have a couple of other ways to apply, or at least you can, we have a couple of point of sale vendors that are participating with us now, and we're looking for more that are actually have their own portals for applying through SBA. And that is available on our website as well. Square, and maybe somebody knows, this program hasn't opened yet. So I know we have at least four different POS vendors that are participating at the moment. 2 of them are taking applications through their portal, and 2 of them are providing gross receipts data for customers in a method that SBA has agreed to accept. There's an 844 number here, so folks have a way to apply telephonically if they aren't able to do it electronically. We don't encourage it, but it is present and available. We don't encourage it because the process is going to be slower to validate information, and we're going to have to use USPS for some of the documentation that's going to be necessary for us to process the application. And given the time frame, it would be, if at all possible, better to go through either the POS vendor or our website directly, but we do have it available, and we want to let you know about it. Okay, Noah's noting Toast and Square POS fully online. So the other 2 are data gatherers. Clover and Aloha. Thank you, Anna. So what documents do I need to apply? There's an application form. When you apply via our website, I understand that it will convert the data that you input into an application form. Same is probably true for Square and Clover, or whatever the other one was. Then there'll be, you'll complete the data required for the form or the form itself. And then it'll be initialed and signed by the applicant, and then made, it'll be a digital form on our website. We will require verification of tax information, so we'll be obtaining, with applicant's approval, at IRS Form 4506T, or perhaps C now, because I believe that just changed. And that will allow us to confirm the gross receipts data for most applicants based on the 2019 and 2020 tax returns. So gross receipts documentation, the next item, any of the following documents are acceptable for demonstrating gross receipts to substantiate the application. So the tax returns, the 1120, 1120S, 1040C and or F, the 1065 for partnerships. So those are obviously preferable because they've been submitted to the federal government, and we can get 4506T confirmation of the transcripts of what was filed, and then we're good to go. Looks like Noah's asking whether or not the 4506T needs to be for each founder. No, it'll be for the applicant entity only. And I had this question from a couple of folks already, if you are on a non-calendar year fiscal year and you haven't filed your tax returns, you could find yourself in a spot where you don't have a 2020 tax return available yet or filed yet. In those cases, you can provide other documentation, including the POS data from the 4 entities that are assisting with us now, or your bank statements, or externally or internally prepared financial statements. Although they'll need to be verified, there'll be a manual process there. We are accepting, as I mentioned, the point of sales reports from those particular providers. Moving on. What do I need to apply? So this is summarizing what you need for the calculations. Somewhat discussed already and a little intuitive in most cases, but you'll have the application form or the data that is fed into creating the electronic form. So you can look at the application form on the website, sba.gov/restaurant in English. I will also say that there are 25 different languages that you can obtain on our website about RRF. So there's some guidance there. I don't know if all of the application has been translated yet to 25 different languages, but I know the majority of them, the largest non-English languages have been. So we'll need the 4506T or C form. We'll need the 2019 gross receipts, and then 3 months of bank statements. And we're asking for 3 months of bank statements in part because we're wanting to confirm your banking relationship. And so we want funds to go to a place where we can confirm that as a fraud reducer. We prefer the tax returns or the point of sales report, but we'll accept, as I mentioned before, the gross receipts or externally or internally prepared financial statements. I will say that there's been some discussion, and this may be in a subsequent slide, but I'll just say it now. We're also, we will accept a comfort letter from your CPA or accountant related to your internally or externally generated financial statements that will expedite the process. We'll do a little less manual process on evaluating those if we have a letter from your CPA. I did talk to a CPA and said that that's something they can do. It's not particularly expensive, but not all CPAs or accountants are comfortable doing that. So, obviously, ideally, we're going to get tax returns, which should be available in most cases. It'll just be the case where, they're not able to do that, where we'll be looking for, alternative support for sales. That was for calculation 1 and 2. For calculation 3, same deal on the application, same thing, 4506T, 3 months of bank statements, same thing, and we'll be looking for eligible expenses. And here we're talking about a comfort letter here as well, and tax returns and or point of sale report. 2020 accepted. Let's see, we will accept 2020 gross receipts on the point of sale report, and again, externally or internally prepared financial statements. So essentially, if you're calculation 3 and you're not open or you've had limited sales in that time frame, then you're going to need to be able to support the expenditures in some way in advance of getting the RRF funds from us. And so there'll be a little bit more work to do because we're looking at expenses only. We can move to the next slide. And I know I've seen some questions pop in, and we'll have time after this to hopefully answer them best as possible. What documents do I need? In addition to the documents on the prior slide, we're going to need some evidence that on-site sales comprise at least 33% of gross receipts for 2019. As I mentioned before, that's a requirement of the program. It's right in the legislation. So, you may be able to come up with that. And there's some ideas of how that could be supported: Tax and Trade Bureau forms, state or local forms, internally created reports, and so on. And for businesses that open in 2020, the applicant's original business model has to have contemplated at least 33% of gross revenues and on-site sales to the public. So that's a capture we're going to need to do, is that, hey, if this is a business that might not have 33% of gross receipts on site, then the business plan perhaps supports that was always intended. There may be a bit of a gray area there, but that's what we're looking for. For applicants that are in documents evidencing that on-site sales of food and beverage to the public comprise at least 33% of gross receipts for 2019. And same deal for businesses that opened in 2020. The applicant's original business model should have contemplated at least 33% of gross receipts. So this is meant to be a restaurant fund. And so if you're not at least a third providing on-site food and beverage, it's not eligible for the program. So we have an 844 number. That 844 number is going to be staffed with trained folks. We have on our website the sba.gov/local assistance will direct you to our district office and or RTA providers such as the SBDCs, Women's Business Center, and so on in Oregon. And we do have multiple languages out on our website. So we believe we have good support for the program, and we encourage you to use it. So we have a slide for best practices. Applications with incomplete documentation will be rejected. What I found is that the first pass it's probably best to do this, have a strong application in, so we don't end up having to manually deal with issues. What we've learned from the volume of transactions that we've had is that the ones that we don't have to touch much go through pretty quickly, and the ones we have to put our hands on tend to be a little bit slower. And so time is of the essence. So let's make sure that documentation is as complete as possible. We encourage the use of professionals when it makes sense to do so. There's item number 3, we're not able to make corrections on behalf of the applicant. So if the applicant needs corrections, they're going to have to call the 844 number, and then we have a manual process. So hopefully it's right the first time. If not, we have a method, but I would encourage folks being careful in their submissions and take a little extra time. Haste makes waste, right? Applicants who still intend to apply for PPP, we suggest that they're going to have to choose their path on this one. If they want to go PPP for some reason instead of RRF, then so be it. But if they're going to go RRF, then we want them to not have a pending PPP application. All right, so what's going on with this program in terms of rollout? Rollout for this program is a little different than what we've had before. I think we've learned a little bit from our prior experiences. We've had a few struggles with initial rollouts, as we just did with the SVOG program, but SVOG came back online and seems to be working okay. But we're going to pilot this for a week. We've selected 1,000 applicants who meet the criteria for the priority period, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we're going to process their applications. We're not accepting requests. We have the 1,000 applicants that we are going to use. They were randomly selected through a method. And we're going to work this program and the portal so that we work out most of the bugs and problems before we open it up to the folks who are eligible in the priority period. So I think it's a good thing. We should always test before we go live, and we're going to do that. So that's, I think we should be happy about that. That pilot period is this week, starting any day. Technically, it may have already started, but we haven't been able to process any of those quite yet. So we do have an open date for this thing currently publicized as May the 3rd at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. So hopefully we'll be through those pilot applications and we'll work out kinks before we open to the priority period. So after the pilot period, next week we'll have that priority period. Days 1 through 21 are going to be ones where we accept applications from eligible folks. It's a limited group, a priority group. It's for businesses that are owned by women, veterans, social and economically disadvantaged applicants will be funded only. So, so that's what we're doing the first 21 days. And then after that, we'll open it up to everybody else until funds are gone. Let's move on to the next slide. So as we can anticipate, you're going to ask, what are the priority groups? So, and this is a little different than how we would normally treat majority ownership, but a small business concern that has at least 51% ownership and management of the daily business operations that are controlled by women, veterans, and socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. Applicants self-certify that they meet the requirements. And we're looking at if an applicant has multiple owners, and we can provide an example. If we look at the sum of the eligible types of owners. So if we have 5 owners with 20% each, 2 are veterans and 1 is socially and economically disadvantaged, that would be 60%. It will meet the 51% test. So any combination of priority ownership will qualify the applicant under the 21-day priority period. Moving on. So let's discuss, we said women and veterans. Let's discuss socially disadvantaged individuals. So those are folks who have been subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias because of their identity as a member of a group without regard to their individual qualities. So we have presumed groups, and this is based on experiences we have with our contracting programs, and we'll reference that regulation as well in a bit. Presumed to be socially disadvantaged are Black Americans, Hispanic, Native, including Alaskan and Native Hawaiians, Asian Pacific, and subcontinent Asians. So if folks are, they have to meet that group in order to automatically qualify for socially disadvantaged, and folks who are in those particular categories get a buy on economically disadvantaged. So those who are socially disadvantaged who are in those groups self-certify and we're done. But the folks who are not in those groups and are otherwise socially disadvantaged based on the criteria that you're seeing here have to also pass the test for economically disadvantaged individuals. Will pass a test. Essentially what they need to do is certify that they're economically disadvantaged. So we'll slide, next slide. All right, so I go back a slide because there really isn't too much more on the economic disadvantage piece. And I'll just say that folks who are not in those groups, which would include women, we believe LGBTQ, perhaps disabled, handicapped, and other potential groups who meet that criteria could qualify as socially disadvantaged if they self-certify. But they don't automatically qualify for the economic disadvantage status, so they're going to have to certify on that as well. We aren't talking too much about economic disadvantage, what it takes to qualify, but I will say that both the program guide and the application itself does go into a little bit of detail there. From what I can tell, most folks are going to be able to qualify for economic disadvantage, but I would encourage folks to take a look at that material and then feel comfortable or not certifying they're economically disadvantaged. So on to the next slide. And an entity reorganization for purposes of qualification for the okay. So what this is saying is you can't cheat. If you're trying to reorganize to get in on this 21-day period, we will disqualify you, period. So, if we are asking for organizational documents, or if you're fiddling around with ownership changes in order to qualify, we will disqualify that applicant, period. Moving on, that never happens, right? Hopefully not. So here's some funding set aside. So folks are concerned about utilization of the funds in a fast manner. And so while we have the 28.6 billion, we have set aside these levels for smaller businesses. So I want to start with number 3 because for whatever reason, we don't really have it in gross receipts order. We have it in a set aside order. So $500 million is set aside for the smallest applicants, those with receipts of not more than $50,000. That's pretty small. And so I think that maybe that category, there are going to be a lot of participants. You can think of food carts or whatever. But that's a good chunk of money at $50,000 at a time. For folks who have receipts of $500,000. Now, let me go to for receipts of not more than 500,000, we have 5 billion set aside. And then for the larger businesses, 500,000 to $1.5 million, 4 billion. So if we were to have a lot of takers for sales, that might meet the maximum amount of the RRF, they'll not be able to access this $9.5 billion, which is a substantial part of the 28.6. There's a note here that we reserve the right to reallocate at the discretion of our administrator, but that's a kind of a comfort thing there, and also making sure that we reach the smallest restaurants, and all the funds don't get, or eligible entities, and all the funds don't get used by the big players or bigger players. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Oh, there we go, Q&A. So how are we doing on time?
Time, we're good.
Good. Well, then we can get to Q&A or any panel member questions, or whatever you like.
Great. So Wendy from SBDC on the Coast had a question about restaurant businesses that started in 2020. Are startup costs covered as an eligible expense in that calculation 3?
Well, let's go back to, I'm going to go find that slide on calculation 3, and let's go over that. Let's see here, if you wouldn't mind.
Or even just use of funds. Yeah, I mean, that's a good one to start on.
All right, eligible expenses calculation 3 says eligible expenses. So any of the other eligible expenses. Remember, construction isn't going to be an eligible expense unless it was. You may recall that slide that talked about modifications of the facility for because of COVID, essentially. Those are okay, but construction and expansion are not, just generally. So I would say you have to look at the particular costs. So like build out like leasehold improvements just to build the thing. I don't think so. You certainly can call the 844 number and ask that question, but that's not how I understand it. I understand that if you had to modify because of COVID, then you'd be okay. But if you're, I think the language we use in the slide is if you're expanding, but if you're building, that cost isn't going to be eligible. I'm pretty confident.
So if they started in 2020, they would want to differentiate operating expenses from startup expenses.
Yeah, I mean, I went a little bit narrower and was breaking out the particular part of startup expenses that might not be eligible. So it might be good to, I'm not going to feel like I can give you a definitive answer without going back to the program guide and looking at, what's included in calculation 3. But it looked like in general, startup related expenses are eligible. And so are expenses. And I don't know that I saw that, but you can go back in time. Calculation, total amount spent on eligible expenses between February 15 and March 11, 2021. So you may have had expenses that were incurred in the past that are eligible for this program. But I guess I would say I would be careful with construction related expenses.
Okay, and I'm going to put a link to the SBA knowledge base, which seems like another good area for people to look up some of these random questions that are kind of hard to get at through the.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for doing that. Right at sba.gov/restaurant in Spanish, restaurant, all lowercase r with an E at the end. There is a link there to the knowledge base, and the knowledge base has about 150 questions that have been answered in there, and you can search it based on a keyword. So, you could look up construction or startup maybe and get an answer. Not all questions have answered, but that knowledge base will grow over time. So thanks for pointing that out. I meant to do that. Any other good questions?
Sam, I have a couple that have come up through the Orca channels in the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
One was from a Portland restaurateur who, like many, has gone to Grubhub and DoorDash and Uber Eats for delivery services, and basically has a separate online menu with different prices, with actually higher prices for those delivery services. And he wanted to know how the Grubhub menu, basically the difference is a pass-through essentially to those delivery services, how that factors into the gross revenue calculation. If he should just use his actual menu prices in his gross revenues calculation, or his receipts on it, for the menu items, or does he need to include what's essentially a pass-through to those delivery services?
That's a good question. I have an answer, but I'm not the source to give that answer. I mean, gross receipts, we indicated what particular items are excluded. And so if it's not on that list at this point, my answer would be that they would include them. Of course, that would plus up potentially, well, actually wouldn't, would it? It would not necessarily plus up their grant because they're subtracting out their 2020 gross receipts. But I don't have any guidance on that. So that would there's something out there, and if there isn't a knowledge base, maybe something can be asked and answered, and we get a little bit more guidance on that. I was thinking certain establishments have lottery as an example, and lottery, I believe now the gross receipts is just the commission on that and not the gross, but it's a little bit different.
Yes. One other one, this is looking at the 33% rule for bakeries, breweries, distilleries, wineries, et cetera, and how it would apply in this circumstance. The client has a commercial kitchen, and he sells most of his product that he produces in the commercial kitchen through a food truck, but he also has a percentage of his sales of his product that he wholesales to grocers in the Portland metro area. So in that case, would he be treated, since it's a mixed revenue source of his on-site sales, if you will, and the wholesale sales, he would still be an eligible applicant if in fact his on-site sales are 33% or more, would he not?
His on-site sales at his location would have to be 33%. And I say that because grocery stores, let's say as an example, could be eligible applicants as well. If they have a deli and it happens to be more than 33% have a seating area, then they too could potentially, I mean, there may not be a lot of them, but they could. So he can't extract those, the wholesale sales from his gross revenues, because obviously it won't match his tax returns or anything else. So he doesn't have the latitude to do that. So he'd have to be able to meet the 33% on site.
Right. Yeah, and in his case, the product he sells to the grocery stores just goes into the freezer and they sell it through the check stand. So it's from what I've been apprised, it's more than 33% of his overall gross sales come from the direct sales through the food truck of that product, and the balance is through the wholesale line there.
Well, if he meets 33%, that's the threshold. I believe though that if you go back to the information, that's for bakeries, right? So certain entities wouldn't apply. So like restaurants, as an example, they are presumed to exceed 33%, but bakeries, wineries, tap rooms, and that kind of thing, they're going to have to evidence it or be able to evidence it.
Okay, but again, because he'd be considered similar to a bakery then in this context.
If assuming he's baking products and selling them through groceries and also on site, yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Sam, I might shift questions to kind of a strategic communications and outreach level. I've suspected that this would need to be a very grassroots outreach of the program, given the timing and the 21-day, period that will almost take us near June, where restaurants are getting busy with summer seasons and what have you. Could you share any best practices you're hearing from other colleagues in other states, or plans that you've heard from SBA in terms of direct outreach to restaurants? We've teamed with the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association over the past year. I even spoke to a director that's working through their county health department and emailed out this last week to 1,700 restaurants about the program. And I suspect that other centers with the SBDC will be able to do that. But any other anecdotal or specific, outreach efforts that you could share?
Well, SBA in general has done put a lot of effort into outreach for RRF, maybe more so than anything else that we've done. We have a few additional trainings that we're doing from the Portland district. We'll be talking to the Oregon State Chamber. We'll be communicating that with various chamber organizations. I've talked to Oregon craft brewers. And I've directed them because, they're an important group for sure, and they are a target audience. But because we're putting on similar presentations to what you guys are seeing today with the same slide deck, in all of these presentations, they'll be able to see the same thing that you're seeing and get that same information. If you went out to Eventbrite, I noticed this the other day, and you looked at our Restaurant Revitalization Fund presentations, they're copious. There are hundreds of them scheduled for the next 2 weeks all over the country. So it's pretty easy to find that information if they know where to look. Also, if you went to our website right now, there are a couple of national presentations that are going to go off. I think tomorrow and the day after, the administrator is going to be on using this or a similar slide deck and also reinforcing. So we're doing our best right now to get out to the qualifying 21-day groups, because those are the ones who can participate now, and encouraging everybody else to be prepared when it opens up to the rest. So yeah, I would say that as an agency, phenomenal efforts to get the information out, or at least direct them to, if not a customized presentation for them, directing them to existing presentations so they can get this information and go. It's a relatively straightforward program. The calculations are fairly easy. I won't say for everybody because not everyone has the same sophistication level, but relatively easy. The program guide is pretty straightforward. You can read it. It's a limited number of pages and in fairly plain speak. And of course, we have you guys, so we like that a lot. And we have it in lots of languages. And so we really feel like we're going to be able to deeply penetrate into, markets and get folks who need the money.
Sam, question for you. So this seems like a head scratcher, and it seems kind of overly simplistic, but I think it's good to clarify. So let's just walk through a couple scenarios. So you've got a single owner of multiple restaurant locations, so all under one business. They would be making one program application that would cover their multiple locations, assuming it's not more than 20, right? Okay.
Yes.
Similar scenario where they have the multiple locations are owned by one entity, but each location is its own LLC, let's say. So let's say they have 10 locations. Are they going to be submitting 10 applications, or are they going to be submitting one application?
Potentially, but I would say those entities probably already applied for PPP. Nearly everybody did who's in that boat. And so I would say mirror what you did with PPP. So if you had the umbrella organization apply and you plugged all the data in for all of the different sub-LLC, sub-entities, then that's what you'll do for this one. If you did them individually for each outlet in their own LLC, then that's what you'll do for this one. But just keep in mind that, if the one entity owns them all, typically it's going to be the one entity that will apply. But if not, you still have the affiliation question. Is it 51% owned by, we say, the applicant entity?
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay.
Today there was a press release SBA sent out announcing some big news around this program. I don't think we mentioned it on the webinar, did we, in terms of the start date?
I think I did that, but I'll restate. Press release went out, said that the applicant window for the 1 to 21 days will be May the 3rd at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. That's our expected start date. That's what we put out, and hopefully that's what we'll keep. We had a little slowness in the pilot week, but we just released it, so I'm presuming we will in fact open it on the date and time mentioned.
Great.
Are we running?
So do we have any other questions, Noah, as we look to wrap up? Or Mike?
Not
We're
seeing
pretty
any
good.
questions from the chat. How about you, Mike?
I don't see any other questions, and those two that I posed were the ones that have been stumpers as far as the queries that have come through the Orca system.
Well, we have posted some future webinars in the chat that will be coming up, and those will also be going out via emails and notifications. So you can find those. I imagine, Sam, those are being advertised on your website as well. In terms of
probably going out in our weekly newsletter. And this morning, we may have a modification to that because there was a conflict with the administrator and one of her webinars tomorrow, I believe. So the event for tomorrow we were going to individually contact registrants for that particular one to let them know to the other alternatives or to go on with the administrator. So I didn't get back to you on that, but the one is going to be scrapped and we'll give people options. The rest of them are ongoing.
Okay, and what we will do is we have the emails of participants for this webinar. We'll do a follow-up email that provides a location of the slide deck and recording of this webinar, along with the upcoming webinars that are going to be targeted to businesses more so than technical assistance providers, even though the presentation will be virtually the same. So if you've been on the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with all that information and links for you and for you to use with your clients as well.
Yeah, I would say the administrators' presentations are Tuesday the 27th at 11:30 Pacific and Wednesday the 28th at 11:30 Pacific. So I think there's a conflict with the Tuesday one. Also, they're limited to 20,000 registrants, but they're going to be recorded and posted on SBA's YouTube channel. So that'll be available. And then finally, like I said, if you go to eventbrite.com and type in restaurant revitalization, you will see countless presentations that are, they may not all be local. They won't be local, but they will be of similar content. And what you'd be missing perhaps is the presenter, local presenter, but the information will be good.
Excellent. And I saw, Noah, Wendy had a question in the chat that popped up. Do you want to ask that one?
I'll grab that one, Steve. Wendy asks, Sam, if two lines of business are under one EIN and food service is not 33% of the total, the food service business cannot apply separately. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And Go ahead, Noah.
Sam, you mentioned that you had done a webinar for the craft beverage folks.
No, they were requesting one, or they were talking about requesting one, but they were accepting of one of the standing public presentations. So that's Christina with Oregon Craft Brew Guild.
So if I'm a brew pub and I've got my 33% on sales, but I'm also selling into grocery, my canned and bottled beverages, I'm not going to be subtracting revenue from that wholesale business from my calculation. It's in there, and I've qualified as my 33% on-site sales. So that's not going to be problematic, right?
No, that's just what we're looking for. So, you know, the breweries come in different shapes and sizes, and some of them do a lot of bottling and sales to groceries, and others are pretty small mom and pop, and you know, they've got seating and tables, and they don't sell that much outside of, you know, their own spot. So yeah, if they sell, as long as they sell 33% or more on site, they're going to be okay.
Okay.
Are we ready to wrap up then, Noah? Mike?
Pretty good.
All right. Any parting comments, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate this. I think it was a great idea to reach out to the TA providers, give them a little heads up before we go out. I think we should do it, you know, for any other programs like this that go out in the future. I hope we got a good mix of folks, the state, your folks, and others, and let's do this again sometime. And you guys, I'm a resource to you. Any of you who are out there listening as well. I will tell you that Portland has donated, or we've had a volunteer to participate in managing this program. So a lot of the field offices have somebody who's now working on teams that will be reviewing or validating the applications. And so that'll be Anna, who the SBDC network is familiar with. And she graciously volunteered to put 60 days or more in doing this. And so we may have a little inside scoop, I'm hoping, if we need it. Hopefully we won't need it, but if we do, we should be able to, you know, get a little more information. So I appreciate what you guys are doing, SBDC, and also everybody on the line, helping the small businesses and the restaurants.
Thanks, Sam. And the SBDCs are a resource too to our technical assistance provider partners. So if you do have questions and you have a relationship with a close by local SBDC, don't hesitate to reach out to them to get guidance or direction and collaborate potentially on a client. We're trying to strengthen those relationships so that we can better serve not only the businesses, but the technical assistance providers that are also serving those businesses as well. And Mark, I'll give you the last word and we'll wrap it up.
Just greatly appreciate the partnerships. Great to have us together, you know, learning about these programs, and hopefully we can continue. So Sam, thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.